She was kneeling beside a wounded soldier, her hands covered in blood from emergency surgery, when the first sniper round shattered the medical tent's window. Everyone dove for cover as enemy forces violated the ceasefire, but Dr. Amanda Walsh stayed calm. She finished closing the soldier's wound, then reached into her medical kit and retrieved something that would change everything. Her grandfather's Vietnam-era M16 that emerged from her supplies wasn't just a weapon. It was a promise that this field hospital would be defended by someone who understood both how to save lives and how to take them. If you believe in stories of quiet heroes who rise when everything falls apart, please hit that subscribe button. These are the moments that define us. Dr. Amanda Walsh had never intended to carry her grandfather's rifle into a war zone. The modified M16 had been carefully stored in her apartment for 3 years since his funeral, a family heirloom that represented decades of military service she had never fully understood. Her grandfather, Staff Sergeant Michael Walsh, had served 2 tours in Vietnam and rarely spoke about his experiences beyond brief mentions of jungle warfare and brotherhood among soldiers who depended on each other for survival. Amanda's childhood had been shaped by weekend visits to her grandfather's modest home outside Denver, where the basement contained a meticulously organized workshop filled with military equipment, historical photographs, and weapons that he maintained with religious precision. The walls displayed medals and commendations that spoke to distinguished service, but Michael never explained their significance or shared the stories behind them. The workshop smelled of gun oil and leather, creating an atmosphere that was both mysterious and comforting to young Amanda. Her path to medicine had been shaped by her desire to heal rather than harm. Growing up in suburban Denver, she had watched her grandfather struggle with memories he couldn't share, nightmares that woke him in the middle of the night, and a sadness that seemed to deepen with each passing year. She had decided early that her life would be dedicated to putting people back together rather than taking them apart. This decision created a fundamental tension with her grandfather's military background, but also deepened her understanding of the human cost of warfare. The contradiction between her grandfather's military service and her medical aspirations had created tension during family gatherings. Michael worried that his granddaughter was choosing naivety over preparedness, while Amanda believed that healing was more important than fighting. Their disagreements were never hostile, but they reflected fundamentally different worldviews about how to respond to violence and suffering. These philosophical differences would prove prophetic in ways neither of them could have imagined. Amanda's parents had been caught between these opposing perspectives, supporting their daughter's medical ambitions while respecting the patriarch's military wisdom. Her father, Michael's son, had chosen civilian life but carried deep respect for his father's service and sacrifice. Family dinners often featured subtle debates about pacifism versus preparedness, with Amanda arguing for diplomatic solutions while her grandfather emphasized the importance of strength in protecting the innocent. Medical school at Johns Hopkins had been grueling but rewarding. Amanda excelled in trauma surgery, drawn to the immediate life-or-death decisions that emergency medicine required. Her professors noted her unusual calm under pressure and her ability to make split-second decisions with surgical precision. She completed her residency at Denver General Hospital, where she specialized in combat trauma techniques despite having no military experience herself. During medical school, Amanda had begun to understand why her grandfather insisted on teaching her practical skills that seemed unrelated to medicine. Weekend shooting lessons had seemed like grandfather-granddaughter bonding time, but now she recognized them as preparation for situations where medical knowledge alone might not be sufficient to protect patients. These lessons had been conducted with military precision, covering not just marksmanship, but weapon maintenance, tactical awareness, and the psychology of armed conflict. The shooting range visits had continued through medical school and residency, partly out of respect for her grandfather's wishes and partly because Amanda discovered she had natural talent for precision marksmanship. Michael had been a patient instructor, teaching her not just how to shoot accurately, but how to maintain weapons, calculate distances, and understand ballistics in ways that paralleled the precision required for surgery. He emphasized that shooting, like surgery, required steady hands, controlled breathing, and absolute focus. Amanda's medical training had included rotations in emergency departments where she treated gunshot victims and trauma cases that provided grim education about the realities of violence. These experiences had given her practical understanding of wound ballistics and the devastating effects of different types of ammunition on human tissue. Her grandfather's lessons about weapons began to make sense in the context of treating their effects on the human body. The opportunity to volunteer with International Medical Relief came during her 4th year of practice. The organization needed experienced trauma surgeons willing to work in conflict zones, providing medical care to wounded soldiers and civilians caught in warfare. Amanda had hesitated initially, knowing the dangers involved, but ultimately felt called to use her skills where they were most desperately needed. The decision represented the convergence of her medical training and her grandfather's military wisdom. Her grandfather had been in the final stages of cancer when Amanda announced her decision to volunteer in conflict zones. His reaction had surprised her with its intensity and clarity. If you're going into war zones, you need to be prepared for more than medical emergencies, he had said with the firmness of someone who had learned hard lessons about survival. This conversation would be one of their last, but it carried weight that would influence Amanda's preparation for deployment. Before leaving for her first deployment, Amanda had visited her grandfather's grave and made a decision that seemed irrational at the time. She took his rifle from storage, cleaned and maintained it according to procedures he had taught her years earlier, and carefully packed it in a specially modified medical kit designed to accommodate both surgical instruments and defensive equipment. The modification required careful planning to ensure the weapon remained concealed while being easily accessible if needed. She told herself it was for sentimental reasons, a way to carry part of his memory with her into dangerous places. But deep down, Amanda knew the real reason. Her grandfather had spent countless hours teaching her that healers and protectors weren't mutually exclusive roles, that sometimes saving lives required eliminating threats to those lives. His lessons had been preparing her for situations she had hoped never to encounter, but was now heading directly toward. The rifle itself was a testament to military craftsmanship and careful maintenance. The M16 had been modified with custom triggers, improved sights, and personalized adjustments that made it uniquely suited to Michael's preferences and shooting style. Amanda had learned to maintain these modifications, understanding that the weapon represented not just military service, but a legacy of protection and precision that could be passed down through generations. The flight to the conflict zone took 18 hours, giving Amanda time to review medical protocols and study intelligence briefings about the region. The war had been raging for 2 years, with both sides claiming territorial victories while civilian casualties mounted steadily. A fragile ceasefire had been negotiated 3 months earlier, creating opportunities for medical organizations to establish field hospitals and treat wounded personnel from all sides. The conflict originated from territorial disputes and ethnic tensions that had simmered for decades before erupting into open warfare. Both sides possessed modern military equipment and had received training from foreign advisors, making the fighting particularly deadly and sophisticated. International mediation efforts had achieved the current ceasefire, but intelligence reports suggested it was temporary and fragile, with both sides using the pause to reposition and resupply for renewed hostilities. Amanda's team consisted of 12 medical professionals from various countries, all volunteers with experience in conflict zones. The team leader, Dr. James Mitchell, was a veteran military surgeon who had served in Afghanistan and Iraq before transitioning to humanitarian work. He briefed the team on security protocols and emphasized that their medical neutrality would protect them under international law, though recent conflicts had shown that such protections were increasingly ignored by military commanders. The other team members included nurses, anesthesiologists, and support personnel who had worked in conflict zones ranging from Syria to Somalia. Their experience provided Amanda with insights into the unique challenges of providing medical care in active war zones, where resources were limited and security was never guaranteed. These conversations revealed that medical neutrality was theoretical protection that worked only when both sides respected international humanitarian law. Dr. Mitchell's briefings covered more than medical protocols. He explained the political dynamics of the conflict, the military capabilities of both sides, and the security arrangements that were supposed to protect medical facilities. The team received training in evacuation procedures, communication protocols, and the legal protections afforded to medical personnel under international humanitarian law. However, recent conflicts had demonstrated that these protections were increasingly ignored by forces that viewed medical facilities as military targets. The team spent 2 days in a staging area, receiving additional briefings from military intelligence officers who provided detailed information about the tactical situation in their deployment area. The briefings included threat assessments, communication procedures, and protocols for requesting military assistance if the security situation deteriorated. Amanda listened to these briefings with growing understanding of why her grandfather had insisted on practical preparation for dangerous situations. The field hospital was established in a partially damaged school building, providing basic surgical facilities and recovery areas for wounded soldiers and civilians. The location had been chosen because it sat in a neutral zone between opposing forces, marked clearly with Red Cross symbols that should have guaranteed protection under Geneva Convention protocols. The building's previous use as an educational facility was considered additional protection, as schools were explicitly protected under international humanitarian law. Converting the school into a functional medical facility required improvisation and creativity. Classrooms became surgical suites, the gymnasium served as a recovery ward, and the cafeteria was converted into a supplies and logistics center. The team worked for 3 days to establish proper medical capabilities while military observers from both sides verified that the facility was genuinely neutral and humanitarian. The process required careful documentation to ensure legal protection under international agreements. The school's infrastructure provided some advantages for medical operations. The building's solid construction offered protection against small arms fire, while the multiple rooms allowed for proper segregation of different medical functions. The cafeteria's large windows provided natural lighting for surgical procedures, while the gymnasium's open space accommodated multiple patient beds with room for medical personnel to move efficiently between cases. During her first week, Amanda treated gunshot wounds, shrapnel injuries, and trauma cases that tested every skill she had developed in civilian practice. The work was emotionally exhausting but professionally fulfilling. She found herself adapting quickly to limited resources and improvised surgical conditions, using techniques she had only read about in medical journals. The variety of injuries required constant improvisation and creative problem-solving that challenged her medical training in unexpected ways. The wounded soldiers who passed through the field hospital came from both sides of the conflict, and Amanda treated them all with equal care and professionalism. Many were young men barely out of their teens, carrying wounds that would affect them for the rest of their lives. Others were career soldiers who had seen too much combat and spoke in quiet voices about wanting the war to end. The diversity of patients provided Amanda with insights into the human cost of conflict that academic medicine had never prepared her for. One patient, Sergeant David Thompson, had been brought in with severe leg wounds from an improvised explosive device. The injury required multiple surgeries and would leave him with permanent mobility limitations, but Amanda's surgical skills had saved his leg from amputation. During his recovery, he noticed Amanda's calm demeanor under pressure and her familiarity with military terminology. His observations would prove significant when the security situation deteriorated and military experience became crucial for survival. Thompson had served 3 tours in various conflicts and possessed the experienced soldier's ability to read people and situations. He recognized something in Amanda's movements and decision-making patterns that suggested training beyond medical school. "You move like someone who's been around soldiers before," he observed during one of her rounds. This comment revealed his awareness that Amanda possessed knowledge and training that went beyond civilian medical education. Amanda had smiled and mentioned her grandfather's military service without going into detail. She didn't mention the rifle hidden in her medical kit or the training she had received in weapons handling and tactical awareness. Those seemed like irrelevant details in a medical setting where her only concern was saving lives and helping patients recover from their injuries. However, Thompson's comment suggested that her background might be more relevant than she had initially believed. The relationship between medical personnel and military patients created unique dynamics in the field hospital. Soldiers from both sides recognized that the medical staff represented neutrality and professionalism that transcended the political divisions driving the conflict. This recognition created bonds of mutual respect that would prove crucial when the security situation deteriorated and civilian medical personnel needed military protection. The ceasefire had held for 6 weeks when intelligence reports began suggesting increased military activity on both sides. Reconnaissance flights detected troop movements and equipment buildups that violated ceasefire agreements. But official protests were ignored by military commanders who claimed they were simply rotating personnel and conducting maintenance operations. These activities suggested that both sides were preparing for renewed hostilities despite their public commitments to peaceful resolution. Both sides were using the ceasefire period to resupply their forces, treat their wounded, and prepare for renewed hostilities. The neutral zone that protected the field hospital was becoming increasingly valuable as a strategic position, making it likely that fighting would resume in the immediate area. Military analysts predicted that the ceasefire would collapse within days, potentially trapping medical personnel in the middle of resumed combat operations. Dr. Mitchell called a team meeting to discuss security concerns and evacuation procedures. The ceasefire is fragile, he explained, consulting reports from military liaisons. Both sides are positioning for potential renewed hostilities. We need to be prepared for rapid evacuation if the situation deteriorates. The meeting revealed that evacuation plans were dependent on cooperation from military forces who might have other priorities when fighting resumed. The evacuation plan involved helicopter extraction to a secure airbase 50 miles away, but the plan depended on advance warning and cooperation from military forces who might have other priorities when fighting resumed. Amanda felt a chill of premonition as she listened to the briefing, recognizing the same intuitive awareness of approaching danger that her grandfather had often described. His training had included lessons about reading tactical situations and recognizing when violence was imminent. The team discussed contingency plans for various scenarios, including what to do if communication with outside forces was cut, if the building came under direct attack, or if evacuation became impossible. These discussions revealed the vulnerability of medical personnel in conflict zones and the limited options available when military protection was withdrawn. Amanda began to understand why her grandfather had insisted that everyone should know how to protect themselves and others. The attack came at dawn on a Tuesday morning when the field hospital was treating its highest number of patients since opening. Amanda was performing surgery on a soldier with internal injuries when the first mortar round exploded in the courtyard outside the main building. The blast shattered windows and sent debris flying through the surgical area, but Amanda continued her procedure while medical staff around her dove for cover. Incoming fire, someone shouted as the reality of renewed combat became undeniable. The ceasefire had collapsed without warning, and both sides had resumed military operations with the field hospital directly in the path of advancing forces who were using the neutral zone as a staging area for tactical movements. The resumption of hostilities caught everyone by surprise, despite intelligence warnings about increased military activity. Amanda remained focused on her patient, whose life depended on completing the surgical procedure she had started. She could hear gunfire getting closer as both sides abandoned ceasefire agreements and resumed full combat operations. The Red Cross symbols that should have protected the medical facility were being ignored by commanders who prioritized military objectives over humanitarian law. The violation of medical neutrality represented a fundamental breakdown in the rules of warfare. For the next hour, Amanda continued treating wounded soldiers while sporadic gunfire echoed around the building. The other medical staff huddled in protected areas, waiting for evacuation orders that never came. Communication with the outside world had been cut when the fighting began, leaving the medical team isolated and vulnerable in a building that was no longer protected by international agreements. The isolation created a sense of abandonment that tested everyone's resolve. The wounded soldiers in the facility represented both sides of the conflict, creating a complex situation where enemy combatants were receiving medical care in the same building. Under normal circumstances, their medical neutrality would have protected them, but the resumption of hostilities had created an environment where humanitarian law was being ignored by military commanders focused on tactical advantages. The presence of wounded soldiers from both sides made the facility a valuable target for forces seeking to eliminate enemy personnel. Sergeant Thompson, who was mobile despite his leg injuries, helped coordinate defensive positions and maintain order among the wounded soldiers who couldn't be moved. His military experience proved valuable in organizing the medical staff and patients for potential evacuation or defensive action. "Doc, you need to get to cover," he told Amanda as she finished stabilizing another patient. His warning reflected his understanding that the facility was no longer safe and that medical personnel were becoming targets. But Amanda refused to abandon her patients, knowing that moving them would worsen their conditions and potentially cause deaths that proper medical care could prevent. She continued working while explosions and gunfire grew closer, trusting that her medical neutrality would eventually be recognized and respected by military commanders who understood international humanitarian law. Her dedication to patient care reflected her medical training, but also demonstrated dangerous naivety about the realities of modern warfare. The calm lasted until mid-afternoon, when a sniper's bullet shattered the window directly above the surgical table where Amanda was working. Glass fragments scattered across the floor as she instinctively shielded her patient from falling debris. The shot had been deliberate, aimed at the medical facility despite clear markings identifying it as a protected humanitarian site. The precision of the shot indicated that medical personnel were being deliberately targeted rather than accidentally endangered. The precision of the shot and its location suggested that enemy forces were deliberately targeting medical personnel rather than simply firing randomly at the building. This represented a clear violation of international humanitarian law and indicated that the field hospital was no longer considered neutral territory by advancing military forces. The deliberate targeting of medical facilities represented a war crime, but provided no protection for the people inside the building. "They're targeting the hospital," Sergeant Thompson said grimly, recognizing the tactical implications of deliberate attacks on medical facilities. "Someone's given orders to eliminate medical support for enemy forces." His assessment revealed that the medical facility had become a military target despite its protected status under international law. The breakdown of humanitarian protections left medical personnel and patients vulnerable to attack without legal recourse. Amanda looked around the field hospital at wounded soldiers who couldn't be moved, medical staff who had volunteered to save lives, and equipment that represented the only hope for dozens of injured people. The realization hit her that military protection wasn't coming, evacuation wasn't possible, and the people under her care were about to become casualties of a war that had forgotten humanitarian principles. The abandonment of civilian medical personnel represented a fundamental failure of the systems designed to protect noncombatants. She finished closing the soldier's wound with hands that remained steady despite the chaos around her. Then she walked to her medical kit, the specially modified bag that had accompanied her through 3 weeks of surgeries and treatments. Her colleagues watched in confusion as she reached past surgical instruments and medical supplies to retrieve something from the bottom compartment. The moment represented the convergence of her medical training and her grandfather's military wisdom. The M16 rifle that emerged was immaculately maintained, its metal surfaces gleaming despite years of storage. Amanda assembled it with practiced movements, her grandfather's training returning as if she had been using military weapons her entire life. The medical staff stared in shock as their gentle surgeon transformed into someone they didn't recognize. The transformation revealed capabilities that had been hidden beneath her medical persona but were now necessary for survival. "Doc, what are you doing?" Dr. Mitchell asked, unable to process the scene unfolding before him. "Protecting my patients," Amanda replied simply, checking the rifle's action and loading a magazine with ammunition she had carried but hoped never to use. Sergeant Thompson understood immediately what was happening. "Your grandfather taught you more than medicine, didn't he?" Amanda nodded as she moved toward the shattered window, scanning the surrounding area for sniper positions that threatened the field hospital. "He taught me that sometimes saving lives means taking them." The first target was a sniper positioned in a building 300 meters away, systematically shooting at medical personnel and wounded soldiers. Amanda calculated windage and elevation with precision that surprised even herself, then squeezed the trigger with the same controlled pressure she used during delicate surgical procedures. The shot required the same steady hands and precise control that made her an excellent surgeon. The shot echoed through the field hospital like thunder, followed by silence from the enemy sniper position. Amanda had eliminated the immediate threat with a single round fired from a rifle that had served her grandfather in jungles half a world away decades earlier. The successful engagement proved that her grandfather's training had prepared her for exactly this type of situation. Jesus Christ, one of the medics whispered as the significance of what had just happened settled over the medical team. But Amanda was already moving to the next firing position, identifying additional threats that endangered the wounded soldiers under her care. The transformation from healer to warrior was complete, driven by protective instincts that overrode every other consideration, including her own safety and the potential consequences of her actions. Her medical training had prepared her to save lives, but her grandfather's lessons had prepared her to protect them. Over the next 2 hours, Amanda systematically eliminated 6 enemy positions that were targeting the field hospital. Each shot was carefully calculated, precisely aimed, and executed with surgical precision that left no room for error. Her grandfather's M16 performed flawlessly, proving that proper maintenance and expert marksmanship could turn vintage equipment into modern battlefield effectiveness. The combination of quality equipment and skilled marksmanship proved superior to quantity of firepower. The wounded soldiers watched in amazement as their doctor defended the field hospital with skills that rivaled professional military snipers. Sergeant Thompson provided tactical guidance and target identification, while other patients who were mobile enough contributed by spotting enemy movements and coordinating defensive positions within the building. The cooperation between medical personnel and military patients created an effective defense despite improvised circumstances. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Thompson asked during a brief lull in the fighting. "My grandfather," Amanda replied, scanning for additional threats. "He said every doctor should know how to protect their patients." The fighting continued until sunset, when advancing friendly forces finally reached the field hospital and established a secure perimeter around the medical facility. The medical facility had survived the day intact, with no additional casualties among staff or patients. Amanda's defensive actions had prevented what could have been a massacre of wounded soldiers and medical personnel. The successful defense proved that proper preparation and training could overcome overwhelming odds. As military security took over defensive positions, Amanda disassembled her grandfather's rifle and returned it to her medical kit. The transformation back to healer happened as quickly as the earlier change to warrior, but something fundamental had shifted in how everyone viewed the quiet surgeon who had saved their lives through actions that went far beyond medical training. The experience had revealed capabilities that transcended traditional professional boundaries. Colonel James Harrison, the commanding officer of the rescue force, debriefed Amanda about the day's events. "Doctor, your actions today went far beyond medical duties. You probably saved dozens of lives by defending this facility." Amanda felt exhausted by the day's events, but satisfied that she had honored both her medical oath and her grandfather's military legacy. "I did what needed to be done to protect my patients." The story of the field hospital defense spread quickly through military channels, earning Amanda recognition from commanders who understood the significance of what had happened. A medical professional had successfully defended a humanitarian facility against military attack, using skills that bridged the gap between healing and warfare in ways that challenged traditional understanding of medical neutrality. The incident became a case study in the importance of comprehensive preparation for dangerous assignments. If you've watched this far, you understand that some of the most powerful moments come from people who refuse to let circumstances define their limits. Amanda's story reminds us that sometimes the greatest act of healing is protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Her grandfather's legacy lived through her actions, proving that some teachings transcend generations and some skills emerge exactly when they're needed most. If these stories of quiet heroism resonate with you, if you believe that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when lives depend on it, please subscribe to our channel. Because these moments of courage deserve to be remembered, and these examples of people rising above their roles to become exactly what the world needs should inspire us all. Thank you for witnessing Amanda's story, and thank you for understanding that sometimes the most important weapons are wielded by those whose primary mission is to heal.